and kia ora tātou. Welcome, everybody. I'm Shaun Bowler. I'm a psychologist here in Tamaki Makaurau in Auckland, and I'm very pleased to be able to talk to you today about this topic of Christmas, connection, and you. And Marissa, thank you for helping facilitate. And if any questions come up, if you could just keep track on them, that would be really good. Make sure that we cover off everything we can. I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes or so, and it might go over a little bit, but hopefully we'll leave about 10 minutes to have any questions and see what questions have come up and answer them. So that's the program for today. And by way of starting, I hope you like my shirt. I got it, it caught my eye, and I thought, oh, that looks like a nice Christmas shirt. But I got it from the hospice shop, and the hospice shop in Takapuna, not far from where I work. And I like that I got it from the hospice shop because I spend a fair bit of time there. And I find increasingly that I'm buying things not only for myself, but also buying gifts for other people from the hospice shop. They have stuff for kids, they have stuff for old people, they have stuff for adults. There's all sorts of stuff. And the reason why I think that's really good is that you're actually doing something quite good, whether it's for hospice or whether you shop in an opportunity shop or thrift shop for the Salvation Army or some other for to support the SPCA or whatever. I think that idea of giving back when we consume fits really nicely with our theme today. And that theme is mixed blessings, Christmas, connection, and so on. Because Christmas is a time of giving and it's a time of receiving. And if we can do that in a way that helps other people and doesn't trash the planet by filling it up with stuff that is going to fall apart or that we don't really need, then that's got to be good, hasn't it? So I encourage you all to think about thrift when you think about gift. So what are we going to cover today? Let's just jump straight into it, shall we? Christmas and connection is all about expectations. And when we look forward to Christmas, we look forward to it with these expectations. And I want to firstly apologize to anybody who's not of the Christian faith because that is an image of the Virgin Mary. There she is expecting a child. And I'm not promoting Christianity. Don't even necessarily call myself a Christian, but there's something in the story of the Nativity that I'd like to touch on. And this theme of expectations. There is Mary expecting the birth of baby Jesus. And the thing is that when we get to Christmas, we're expecting as well. We're expecting to have a good time. We're expecting to reconnect with people. We're expecting to relax. We've got all these high expectations. We make travel plans, we research gifts, we look at recipes. But often there's a gap between what we're expecting and what we're hoping for and the reality. Because sometimes things don't go to plan. And sometimes there's not only a gap between what we're expecting and hoping for in the future, but there's also this gap between that and all the good feelings we're hoping we're going to get and the reality of being in the present moment, which is often quite stressful at Christmas. Or there can be conflict, or you can be tired. A lot of people talk about being tired at the end of the year. And so sometimes those high expectations are the cause of a little bit of pain and suffering for us. And yes, there's some good things, and a lot of these good things do come to pass, but often there's letdowns, and often there's even a little bit of sadness. And often what we do is we focus on all the good stuff that we want to happen, but we forget about the difficulties that's involved in that, all the chores that need to be done, all the flights, all the travel, all the cooking that needs to be done. And often, and I say this, quite openly, I feel that often for women, it's often worse because, rightly or wrongly, often women do take up a lot of the burden when it comes to all this planning and this work that we have to do to make all these good things happen. And I know that, from experience, my wife gets quite ratty at Christmas time. And that's because she's keeping track of lists and who's got to go, who's got to have gifts for what and what's going to be cooked and does the gas bomb need filling. At least I can do that one. But she's keeping tabs of an awful lot. So that, I'm just making the point that there is a lot of work around Christmas. Often it falls more to women than men. Maybe that's not the same in your household, and I certainly hope so. So it's this unrealistic set of expectations that can create this disconnect between what we're hoping for and what actually happens, and this sense of things not being quite as we want them to be. What if we have to work? My brother-in-law is a care worker, a support worker, and he expects to work on Christmas Day, so he doesn't get too disappointed about that. But what if we don't get that, Christmas Day off as a holiday? What if we have to provide for our family, or we expected to do the shift work or cover? And so that can be a source of disappointment. And I've talked about who does the work. But what can traditions teach us? And so if we think about this nativity, this thing with Joseph and Mary, what happened there? Well, what it does is it teaches us actually how to cope a little bit at Christmas. And when you think about what happened with Jesus and Mary, Joseph and Mary traveling to Bethlehem for the census at that time, 2,000 years ago, regardless of whether you think the story is true or not, it's a good story. And I quite like it because it teaches us that, you can hope that you're going to be going to the inn, to the fancy hotel, but then you get, maybe it's Airbnb, but you don't get the Airbnb that you quite wanted. In Joseph and Mary's case, the Airbnb was full and they got a manger, a cattle shed, because there was no room at that Airbnb, it was booked. And so she gave birth in this lowly cattle shed. And it was a very humble thing. And this is the story. Despite the humility or the humbleness of that lowly cattle shed surrounded by animals and straw, a miracle still occurred. And so there was this idea that you could have perfection and imperfection side by side. And this, I think, is the true story of, this is the true lesson of the Nativity for me, as somebody who just likes the story, is that perfection and imperfection live side by side, that there's always rough with the smooth and always some beauty in the rough. And this is what Christmas is like. And so if we can take this idea of knowing that in this striving for perfection of Christmas, the connections that we want to make with people, the beautiful food that we want to eat, the relaxing time we want to have, the rejuvenation we're looking for, that there can also be, little bits of pain or little bits of things that don't go so well, then that can be quite reassuring in a sense. Quite reassuring. And we can flip it on its head and do it the other way and say, actually, I don't really like Christmas, but maybe there's some little bits of beauty in there as well. So it's understanding that it's a mixed thing. And this, I think, is the lesson of the Nativity, certainly for me. You might see it differently. So what are some of the top tips for how we can survive, and not only survive, but thrive at Christmas time? Well, here's some of the ones that I've come across. And the first one relates to, I don't know if how many of you are familiar with the 5 ways to well-being, but one of the 5 ways to well-being, and these 5 ways refer to things that we can do for ourselves that help keep us feeling well, feeling good. One of them is give, okay? And it's very well documented in all the mental health literature and all the well-being literature that giving to others is highly associated with good mental health and a sense of well-being. when you give, you have the capacity to do something for others. And not only that, you're functioning at a higher level, you're not just surviving. And the other thing that happens is you actually feel good as a result of it. So when you do something for someone else, you're actually doing something for yourself, okay? And it can help build connections as well. So this keeping of our hearts open at Christmas time is especially important. And the thing is that it doesn't have to be, a material thing that you give them or that you do for them. It can simply be some presents, okay? And I'll come to that in a moment. The second point there is about managing alcohol and drug consumption. And so we talk about connection. Alcohol is often what we call a social lubricant. It lowers social inhibitions. It can reduce anxiety, certainly in the short term. And so that's why, having a few drinks can loosen us up a little bit. MMDA, for example, one of the effects, I'm told, not that I've ever taken, is that you feel more connected to other people. And so it becomes known as a party drug. And so both of these things, what we're doing when we try to use them often is we're trying to become more connected. But, to a certain extent, there's probably nothing wrong with doing that. Certainly with alcohol, I'm not proposing that anybody do anything illegal. In moderation, drinking for enjoyment is fine. But the problem is, if you're doing it not for enjoyment, but to cope with the social situation, then that's a little bit more problematic. Okay, so at Christmas time, it's really important to, and any other holiday, to reflect on whether your alcohol or your drug consumption is there for your enjoyment, or you're actually using it as a way to cope. And if you're using it as a way to cope, I strongly recommend that you reach out, maybe through the Ignite platform, and talk to somebody, because that's a sign that maybe you need to address something. Third point there, it's okay to feel low at Christmas. You're not alone. This is part of it. And some days you'll actually have better time than others. A lot of people do feel a little bit down at Christmas. And so I just wanted to say that you're not alone with that. It is a normal sensation because it is a mixed bag. We talk about this imperfection and perfection of Christmas. But if it's something that continues on for a long time, or carries on into the new year for a long time, then maybe, that's another time where you might want to reach out through the Ignite platform, or, talking to somebody that you trust, for example. Fourth point there, Christmas is not perfect. Let's get real with this. I mean, hay fever, sunburn, often tropical cyclones. Not everything that happens at Christmas is good. There is good stuff that happens, but let's say, if we take the pressure off ourselves and say this is not always a perfect experience, that can help. That next point, get plenty of sleep. Christmas is a holiday. Sometimes we forget this, okay? You're not supposed to rest when you're back at work in the new year. You're actually supposed to rest during the holiday. That is what a holiday is for. It's for rest and rejuvenation. And instead what we do is we run ourselves ragged off, and we're up late at night, and we're often eating and drinking too much, etc., etc. And then we get to the end of the holiday and we're exhausted. And we start off the year exhausted. So I encourage you to remember that Christmas is a holiday. And if you want to go off and have a sleep or sleep in or whatever, then maybe that's the whole point of it, or certainly part of the point of it. And this last point, don't take Christmas at the pace that Harvey Norman wants you to take it at and rush down to the sale. Take it at your own pace. And if that means being late or slow or packing less in according to your social obligations, then maybe that's something that you need to think about. Okay, continuing with these tips, travel. Travel can be exciting. It can be thrilling. It can be a source of discovery. Marissa and I were just talking about the joys of discovering new places. But it can also be dangerous, and it can also be expensive. And particularly at Christmas and New Year in New Zealand, travel on the roads can be dangerous, and certainly expensive. So one thing that you can do is perhaps reflect on how you can still maintain connections without the need to put so much travel and stress in. Anybody who's had to go through airport security at a holiday period or on a long weekend or whatever can understand that that's not necessarily going to be particularly good for your mental health. So limiting travel is a really good tip for surviving Christmas and thriving at Christmas. And this idea of staycations, I can really recommend it. That's something I do personally, make a point of not traveling if I possibly can. And I understand that there are social obligations that come into this as well, but it's certainly something to think about. Simplify the menu. Christmas was not necessarily a feast. Turkeys didn't exist 2,000 years ago. I just want to point out that Joseph and Mary were both Jewish, so they didn't eat ham. And so, you know, think about simplifying your menu to make your stress a little bit less, and realize that people are coming together to be together, not necessarily to have a 5 Michelin star or a 3 Michelin star restaurant. This idea of the shirt, simplifying the gift, using a thrift instead of gifts, giving presents, giving your presence, i.e. your physical presence and your mental presence and your awareness, rather than presence with a T, is a real opportunity to actually give more fully. Because at the end of the day, most of what we give ends up in landfill at some point or other. Often not, I understand that, but what is more important is being together. So it's this idea of people, not stuff. He tangata, he tangata, he tangata, as the whakataaki goes. It's all about people. Okay, so one last point I want to touch on, or second last point, is conflict. Christmas comes with all these connections, but it can also be a time of conflict. And often we have these expectations that the family get-togethers are going to be great. But at the end of the day, the same old scabs sometimes are sitting there underneath, and you know, that same old parent-child relationship that's problematic, or you know, you've been struggling with since you were left home, got so annoyed with them and left home, is still simmering away there. And you know, sometimes it pops up at Christmas, and sometimes you've got an old uncle who just tells these really off-color jokes or makes these comments that are unacceptable. And you think, oh, how am I going to cope with that? And so to have a plan to manage conflict at Christmas time is actually quite a useful thing if that's part of your experience. The first tip I've got is to prepare your response. So if, for example, you know that so-and-so is going to say, oh, you've put on weight, you look fat, for example. You know, something really in your face like that, or, you know, whatever your experience is, you might have a response already to go. So it could be something like, well, I'm quite comfortable with my appearance, thank you, and ended at that. So you're armed and you closed it down. The second one I'm actually a really big fan of, because it's much harder to keep the conversation going, and that is simply ignoring the bad behavior and using silence. So if somebody makes that off-color comment, says something that you find politically disagreeable with, picks up an old wound and just keeps going with it, the best way is to treat them like you would a child who was having a tantrum, and simply just not respond, possibly even walk away. And that way you just don't get into it. And that often is the best way to shut down this stuff, because if they can't engage, then they won't. So yeah, there's a couple of ideas for managing those really difficult kind of situations that occasionally do come up in some people's experience. And I'm giving you the kind of the worst case scenario. It's not always like this. Often it's nothing but good stuff. But if it's not always like that for you, there's a couple of ideas. Okay, so just before we finish, when I build this webinar, I did say that sometimes there's dodgy chicken involved. So I do plead with you. There's nothing quite like an outbreak of Campylobacter from your family get-together to dampen your connections, because they will all be spinning tacks at you. So cook your chook, make sure it's not pink inside, that it's totally cooked, and don't let it sit around for too long, lukewarm, before you eat it. And whatever you do, use separate preparation boards for those chickens, and you'll keep your connections pretty good.